Scientific research tells us that non-autistic people can identify an autistic person within just a few seconds of meeting them. And the same research tells us that allistic people tend to dislike autistic people that bit more than their peers. So, if that's truly the case, why do we even bother masking? Why do we even try to mask? Chapter 1. Everybody masks. We all wear clothes to cover ourselves, for privacy and for our public persona, image and work. I mean, would you go shopping or outside without wearing any clothes? Of course not. Would you? Would you deliberately share your thoughts in real time with everyone around you? And when we interact with others, we try to hold something back. We all hold something of ourselves in. We all try to fit in. Masking is the act of concealing one's true self to fit into societal norms or expectations. Wearing clothes does a lot for us. Now, it provides us with a privacy screen. It provides us with warmth, self-expression, and it also meets the expectations of others. You know to wear a suit when you go to a job interview and not your pajamas, just as we choose specific clothes for specific situations. Allistic people, that's non-autistic people, have this innate ability to choose specific social behaviours or masks to quickly fit in. Allistic people have an advantage when it comes to masking, having learned how to socially blend in from a really early age. When allistic people socially mask to blend in with a group, it's often praised as being professional. Masking is the act, although it's rarely the label that allistics use for that behaviour, whereas autistic individuals masking can be seen as deceptive or inauthentic. After all, a mask does suggest a deception. When I think of masking, I'm thinking how someone might be maliciously covering their true intentions. A bit like Joe from You, where we hear his conflict between his deceptive internal monologue and his outwardly socially acceptable behaviours.
So Joe, how have you found the transition to fatherhood?
An existential tangle of dread and failure.
That's great. Of course, a little challenging.
Now, masking does not need to be as dark as that. Being professional is just allistic shorthand for adopting a more formal tone, suppressing any personal quirks, and adhering to the company culture and generally keeping one's personal life topics out of the conversation. Even Instagram and social media allow people to post only the curated best parts of their lives, which lets them just mask any struggles or mundane aspects of their day, right? I remember so clearly my first job after university as a junior software developer. My colleagues would make really weird comments about how I was dressed. I didn't kind of understand what they meant. This actually went on for about 2 weeks. The directors all wore suits, and I didn't have any sort of smart clothes that I wanted to wear. I just sort of had comfortable clothes and formal clothes. Now, there's a lot less you can say about someone's appearance if they wear a suit to work. It's essentially a professional uniform, and that's what I wore. I wore a simple black suit. After a week, my boss told me, look, we don't wear ties in here. We don't wear ties. I'm like, okay, right. So I took the tie off. I didn't want to wear it anyway, but I hadn't picked up on the social cues or the sniggering of my less friendly chino trousers and polo-necked colleagues. Had I picked up on their social cues, or had I been told what the dress code was, like up front, I could have saved myself weeks of embarrassment. If you're allistic in hearing this, you might wonder, that's a weird story, why I didn't know how to fit in. I mean, I was 21 years old and I had a computer science degree and it was a technical job. And I knew I was experiencing workplace bullying. I just couldn't figure out what it was about or how to make it stop. It was like everyone could see like a big ketchup stain on my shirt and I just couldn't see it. For autistic people, this isn't fun at all. We often have what other people call a spiky skill set. We could be like way above average and excellent in far above average in some areas and really far below expectations in others. The vast majority of us are not savants though. Would you believe Hollywood still uses the harmful and outdated idiot savant trope? Someone under all circumstances who seems so bloody stupid and socially awkward, but in the right situation, they're like outstandingly brilliant. Rain Man, by the way, wasn't autistic, and neither is Sheldon Cooper, and we'll get to that. We'll get to why they're bad examples of autistics in another video. Some autistics say that they feel like they're an alien visiting a completely different planet, completely different culture. Others have said that they feel forever stuck, like they're stuck behind a pane of glass. But one thing is clear. Autistic people were not born with the same instruction manual for social interaction that allistics get from the magical social abilities fairy. I don't know, maybe they leave a manual under their pillow in the first few years of life. And this means that autistic people, we have to learn the hard way how to mask. And masking is a pervasive, constant effort. It's a performance, right? Like acting. I'm acting the character of Mike, socially competent, friendly, even sometimes outgoing, sort of a means of social survival. Chapter 2. Autistic masking is a social survival mechanism. Masking is not a choice, but an imposition. In 2017, the scientific journal Nature published a paper which details how neurotypical, or allistic people, were less willing to interact with autistic people based upon judgments made, get this, in the first few seconds. Now, they showed that although allistic people found autistic people to be just as smart or trustworthy as their fellow allistics, and in general they wouldn't mind living near them, they preferred not to hang out with autistics. They preferred not to talk to them, or they generally didn't even like them that much. They found autistic people to be more awkward and less attractive and less dominant than their neurotypical peers. And all of this judgment happens in just a few short seconds. And by the way, exposure to the autistic person and whatnot doesn't actually make any difference. And this is children, not just adults. It's kind of crazy how prejudiced people can be, right? That's why we need the mask. Autistic people are deeply familiar, often to a traumatic degree, about how neurotypical people, especially in groups, will treat them if they don't fit in. I'm not saying it's not possible for autistic people to fit in with neurotypicals. What I'm saying is that it can take a significant amount of energy to do so. It doesn't come naturally. I'd like to bring up a metaphor. As a scuba diver, when I'm diving, my brain is running through a loop. The loop goes like this. Where am I? Where's my body? What is my depth? What's my dive time? What's my gas situation look like? Am I in deco? Are we still to plan? How do I feel? What can I see? Do I need to record it or take a photo for a C-search recording form? And then I loop around again. It's actually quite relaxing, but this should explain what I'm thinking about when I'm on a typical dive. Now, divers call this process task loading, and it's why we are really careful with new equipment or sea conditions, so that we're working within our abilities. I find diving really peaceful. It's very structured and filled with routines. When I'm talking to someone, I'm running through a really similar loop. My brain is heavily task loaded. Make eye contact or not. Listen to what they're saying. Think about my response. What about their energy levels? Do my energy levels match theirs? Trying to drown out distractions like these bright lights, or are there any like noises? Is it too hot or cold again? Sorry, what were you saying? Many autists over time develop social scripts to cope with situations like these. And with practice, it can come across as fluently neurotypical. Oscar winning, perhaps. But should the conversation change unexpectedly, or a newcomer bringing up an unprepared topic, and it's usually sports, then the mental task loading stress increases. It gets worse for women, girls, people of colour, who tend to be better at masking or don't fit the stereotype for picking up an autistic diagnosis. We all have different ways to manage this stress, and every autistic person has their own capacity to manage. However, one thing that's common for all autists is that we manage or regulate the level of over or under, hypo stimulation with behaviours that psychologists call, some people call it stimming. I think it's more self-soothing is probably better. Stimming has got, a weird connotation to it. Late diagnosed autistic. I'm not brought up with this language, right? All this new language to learn. Now, stimming, or according to the DSM-5, it comes under a category called restrictive repetitive behaviours. But it's different for everyone. For me, it can involve bouncing a leg. That's what I'm doing right now. It can be rubbing or counting each of my fingers in turn. It can be pinching or pulling my hair or my neck, just a few examples. I move my arms around a lot, and sometimes when I'm happy, I'll clap. Some autists like to spin. I do too on nature walks. Generally, I'll spin around, but generally I try to keep my movements, especially in professional situations, as suppressed and under control as I can. I've had a 20-year career in software development, and I've worked on some large, complex systems. Everything from the NHS, I was one of the dozen software engineers who built the NHS spine, back when it was called the National Programme for IT. I previously worked for Microsoft. I've led a police project on their national database. I've worked in defence. Throughout this career, I was bouncing my leg under whatever desk I was working from, sometimes flapping my hands a bit in between tasks, a bit of paper or whatnot, just to refresh my muscle memory, I would say. Generally, the louder or brighter the environment, or the less self-conscious I was, the more I would fidget. If you're working with or socialising with neurotypicals, then you're going to need to suppress those movements. Bite your lips, squeeze your toes in your shoes, but whatever you do, act normal. Some autists will say that you need to remove the mask. Be as authentically autistic as you naturally are. And hey, look, in an ideal situation, an ideal world, that is exactly right. And it's why neurodivergent people tend to seek out other neurodivergent people, other autistic people. There's no stigma, no judgment. But when you're in an holistic world that hasn't been designed for you, particularly late diagnosed autistic adults like me, we all struggle, as many of our natural behaviours have been suppressed and overwritten maybe with artificial masking behaviours over the years. Demasking and living as our authentic autistic selves would mean, on one hand, we won't incur stresses from the masking process. But, on the other hand, it will change, possibly for the worse, our relationships with our neurotypical colleagues, friends, maybe even our families, maybe even our loved ones. So autistic people are stuck between masking and building up stress that, unchecked, will lead to burnout, shutdown, those times when it becomes too much, when that stress level hits a peak. This is for another video. I can just feel constantly new videos coming on. Anything you want me to cover, drop it in the comments. Let's have a chat about it. I've done check further. It could lead to meltdown. Let's just say it could also lead to being ignored, left out, or bullied. For late diagnosed autistic people like me, there's a big identity impact and a loss of a sense of self. I feel like I'm still pretty early, I would say, on the journey of learning what it means to have been an autistic person my whole life, not a broken neurotypical. That's absolutely key. You may have heard it elsewhere, but there's the realization, hey, I'm not actually rubbish and struggling to fit in and just broken. I'm actually a really good autistic person. I still feel like I'm early on in the journey of learning what it means to have been an autistic person my whole life. Not a broken neurotypical, but a perfectly functioning, whole autistic person. Spending much of an adult life learning from other people how to interact. All the various unspoken rules. Reading between the lines. Wouldn't it have just been easier if people just treated each other directly? Ideally by text or email, rather than with hints, insinuations, and undertones? But learning to pass as a neurotypical means that it's less likely that you're going to get picked up by the system, so to speak. I mean, even if you want an autism diagnosis and you're fortunate enough to be able to put yourself, financially too, in front of a supportive psychologist or psychiatrist, every instinct that you have will tell you to act normal, like you've done your whole life. It's hard to break the habits learned over a lifetime. And to make it worse, the longer the stress builds, the faster and more prolonged the inevitable shutdowns, meltdowns and burnout. Wow. This is the life that autistic people have to live with. It's tough. Chapter 3, Unmasking. What if I told you there was a way to make the bias against autistic people completely disappear? Because there is. Now, in the Nature paper, we learn autistic children, as well as adults, make these judgments in the first few seconds, and they don't change their minds after repeated exposure to autistic people. So how do we make these biases disappear? Come here. When the study participants interacted without audio or video, no biases at all. This suggests that it's style, not substance, that drives the negative impressions of ASD. So text communication is the perfect leveler. You know what else helps autistic people? The text section below in the comments section. Sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. Please feel free to share your unmasked thoughts below. Now, dropping the social facade and being one's authentic self can have both positive and negative consequences. You're going to have people tell you that you're acting more autistic now, especially following a diagnosis. There's also an increased likelihood, I'm sorry to say, of bullying or exclusion, especially in places that are less accepting. And of course, autistic masking means you lose, temporarily, a vital, valuable survival mechanism. This survival mechanism gives us the ability to move, although not perfectly incognito, as we've just learned, through holistic spaces, but at the cost of our own characters and our mental health. It isn't healthy to long-term mask. Like all things in life, it's going to be a compromise. And it gets a little bit more complicated because, as I mentioned, the later an unidentified autistic person realizes that they're autistic, the more likely they are to have lost, sadly, some part of themselves to the mask. Once you realise that you've been masking this whole time, you'll realise you're doing it to appease some sort of inner critic, an inner voice. This inner critic is repeating an internalised monologue, telling you not to fidget, to look people in the eyes when they're talking to you, to keep quiet and still. You begin to realise that your masking instinct comes from a place where you are just simply appeasing an inner voice. Sometimes you're doing it for the benefit of other people. In another video, we'll go through the formal diagnostic criteria, and you'll see just how othering it can be, because everything that's written in the diagnostic criteria nearly entirely relates to how your autistic self upsets or inconveniences other people. It's not about how it affects you internally. It can take a long time from a series of these moments, one after another, and looking back on past events, now with the autistic knowledge that you are autistic, thinking, oh, that's why I did that, or felt this way, or why that person said that. Unmasking a little, trying not to suppress certain stims. One of the things I do is squeeze and rub the back of my head or my arms, or that's more socially acceptable than doing the Flappy Bird. And it helps to disperse some of the excess sparkling energy. On trips, I found my massive headphones useful. I've even travelled with them when, and Apple geeks will get this, they're not actually as good as my AirPod Pro 2s, but it sends the signal that I talked about in my video on monotropism. If you relate to some of the things in this video, you could be autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. In this video, I cover what might be the best autistic theory and tips to help you improve your quality of life. If you think this video could be useful to other members of the autistic community or undiagnosed autistic people, please hit the like button and consider the subscribe button and the bell too. This helps the channel to grow and helps others see it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you as always on Sunday.